Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I found forum on the deep web about the worst creature on the planet. After reading it, I found I was his next victim. Hey everyone. So I've always been the kind of person who can't leave well enough alone. I get too curious for my own good. Last year, I stumbled onto something I wish I hadn't. Something that's made my life a living nightmare. I want to share my story, partly as a warning, and partly because I just need to get it out. I don't care if you believe me. I just need to say it. It all started when I was diving into the deep web. Now, before you roll your eyes, I know how cliche that sounds, but I swear this isn't one of those typical horror stories. I've always been fascinated by the dark corners of the internet, the places where the light of law and order doesn't quite reach. There's a kind of thrill that comes with it, like urban exploration, but for the digital world. I'd always been careful though. I used VPNs, proxy servers, you name it. I wasn't just some idiot with a death wish. Anyway, one night, I was bored and couldn't sleep. I decided to go deeper than I ever had before. I was exploring a series of forums and stumbled across one with a bizarre name, Tales of the Unspeakable. It wasn't the usual hacker or conspiracy stuff. It looked like a community dedicated to sharing stories and experiences about something called the Watcher. Most of the posts were vague, talking about how the Watcher had been part of human history for centuries. The descriptions were all over the place. Some called it a creature. Others said it was a spirit or a curse that followed certain bloodlines. There were hundreds of pages, and the deeper I read, the more unsettled I became. These weren't just ghost stories. They felt personal, like these people were genuinely terrified for their lives. One post caught my attention. It was from someone called Shadowkeeper, and it was the most upvoted post on the entire forum. The title was simply, "Don't Let Him In." The post detailed a series of events that led Shadowkeeper to believe they were being stalked by the Watcher. They wrote about waking up at exactly 3:33 a.m. every night, hearing faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls. Their pets went missing, one by one, until they were left alone. Doors that had been locked were found ajar, and they were constantly plagued by the feeling of being watched. The most disturbing part was when Shadowkeeper claimed they started finding messages scratched into the walls of their home. Words like, "see you," and "soon," in jagged, uneven letters. The scariest thing was how they described their mental state. They felt like their thoughts were being invaded, twisted. They started seeing things that weren't there, shadows moving in their peripheral vision. I'm not gonna lie, I was freaked out, but there was a part of me that was intrigued. How much of this was just someone trying to spook the internet? I clicked on Shadowkeeper's profile, looking for more posts. They hadn't posted anything else, but I found an email address listed in their bio. Now, in hindsight, this was the dumbest thing I could have done, but like I said, I'm too curious for my own good. I sent an email. It was a simple message, something like, "Hey, I read your post. Is any of it true?" I didn't expect a reply, but a few hours later, I got one. The email was short and frantic. All it said was, "He knows. Be careful." My skin crawled. It was like they were waiting for someone to contact them. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. I wasn't about to let myself get scared off by a prank. That night, I continued to dig through the forum, finding more accounts of people who believed they were being hunted by this entity. It all sounded so unbelievable, yet the fear in their words felt genuine. As I was about to log off and go to bed, I noticed a new message in my inbox. It was from Shadowkeeper's email, but this time there was no text, just an attachment. It was a photo. With my heart pounding in my chest, I opened it. The image was dark and grainy, like it had been taken with a crappy phone camera. It showed a room, a bedroom, I think. The walls were covered in those same scratched words, "See you, soon." But that wasn't the worst part. In the corner of the photo, just barely visible, was a figure. It was a shadowy silhouette, almost humanoid, but distorted, like it was made of smoke or mist. I slammed my laptop shut and tried to shake off the growing fear. I told myself it was fake, just some elaborate prank to mess with idiots like me. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like someone or something had noticed me through the screen. That night was the first time I woke up at 3:33 a.m. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. I listened for whispers, for footsteps, but the house was silent. Just as I was about to convince myself it was all in my head, I heard a faint scratching sound from somewhere in the house. I froze. It was coming from the living room, the sound of something sharp dragging across the wall. I wanted to get up and check, but fear rooted me to the bed. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. After what felt like hours, the scratching stopped. The silence was almost worse, filled with an oppressive sense of dread. When morning finally came, I forced myself to investigate. I crept into the living room, half expecting to find nothing, but there it was, etched into the paint. "See you." That was the moment I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. I'd let something in, and it wasn't going to leave until it had what it wanted. I spent that day in a fog, replaying the events of the night over and over. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, sent a jolt of panic through me. I tried to tell myself it was all some sick joke, that someone was messing with me, but deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. I had to know more about this watcher, this thing that had somehow infiltrated my life. I went back to the forum, hoping to find some clue that would help me understand what I was dealing with. The first thing I noticed was a new thread pinned to the top of the page, titled "Attention to Those Who Seek." The post was from the forum's admin, someone with the username Oblivion Master. They wrote about how people who got too close to the truth had a way of disappearing. The thread was a warning not to dig too deep, not to contact anyone from the forum directly. It was as if they were speaking directly to me. It seemed almost like a sign, a reminder of the email and picture from Shadowkeeper. My gut twisted at the realization that this wasn't just some internet creepypasta. This was something alive, something that knew I had crossed a line. I tried to remember if I'd seen anything else unusual recently, but everything had been normal until last night. It was just me and my laptop in the dark, and now I was terrified of my own shadow. In the following days, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was like an itch in my brain, a constant pressure that never went away. I started losing sleep, too afraid of waking up at 3:33 a.m. again. I tried staying awake all night with the lights on, but exhaustion would eventually take over, and I'd find myself waking to the same minute every time, drenched in sweat and trembling. One morning, after a particularly restless night, I noticed something even stranger. I had a voicemail from an unknown number. My hand shook as I pressed play, unsure of what to expect. The message was brief but chilling, a low, guttural whisper repeating a single word. Watch. I dropped the phone and it clattered to the floor. My skin felt cold and clammy, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss. I didn't know what to do. The police wouldn't believe me, and telling anyone would make me sound insane. But the message felt like a command, a warning. It left me with a choice: stay and face whatever was haunting me, or run and hope to escape it. But where could I run? The fear wasn't just in my house. It was inside me, in my head, in the air around me. No matter where I went, the watcher was always there, a shadow lurking just out of sight. Then the hallucinations started. They began subtly, barely perceptible movements at the corner of my eye. I would catch glimpses of the figure from the photo, lurking in reflections, hiding in the corners of darkened rooms. It was never there when I turned to look directly, but I could feel its presence like a cold breath on the back of my neck. The scratches on the walls multiplied. More words appeared overnight, desperate messages that made no sense, but filled me with dread. Sometimes it would just be my name over and over again, as if whatever this thing was, it was trying to break into my mind. Paranoia clawed at my sanity, turning everyday noises into threats. I locked every door and window, barricaded myself in my bedroom at night, but it didn't help. I still woke up at 3:33 a.m. without fail, feeling the watcher's gaze heavy on me. The only thing that provided any comfort was a small community that had started forming on the forum. Others like me were experiencing the same things. We shared our fears and theories, trying to piece together what the watcher wanted. One user, Midnight Murmur, suggested that the watcher was feeding off our fear, growing stronger with every moment of terror it inspired. But then Midnight Murmur stopped posting. Just like Shadowkeeper, they vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but their cryptic warnings. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't go on like this. I had to confront whatever it was, face it head on, and find a way to rid myself of its presence. I decided to try and track down the location of Shadowkeeper. Maybe if I found them, I could find answers, or at the very least, learn what had happened to them. The email exchange had a digital signature I hadn't noticed before. Using some tools I had, I managed to trace it back to a location on the outskirts of the town. It was risky, maybe even foolish, but I felt like I had no choice. With my heart pounding and a feeling of dread pooling in my stomach, I drove out to the address. It was an old, decrepit house that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The windows were boarded up, and the front door hung open on broken hinges, creaking ominously in the wind. As I approached, I noticed the scratches, words carved into the wood of the front door, repeating a familiar mantra: "See you, Watcher." Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, feeling the chill of the place seep into my bones. The air was thick with dust and decay, but beneath that was something else, a sense of wrongness, like the house itself was alive with a dark energy. I made my way through the dim rooms, my footsteps echoing eerily. Each room was filled with more of those carvings, desperate scribbles and symbols I couldn't understand. It felt like walking through a tomb, the air heavy with the echoes of whatever terror had once inhabited this place. And then, in the back room, I found it. A message, scrawled in blood-red paint across the wall, reading, "He sees you now." The reality of my situation hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just another victim in a long line of them. I was the next target. This thing, whatever it was, had chosen me, and there was no escaping its grasp. After leaving the house, my mind was in a haze. The fear had taken root so deeply that every noise, every shadow, felt like an attack. The words painted on the wall haunted me, lingering in my thoughts like a curse. I drove home on autopilot, barely aware of the road in front of me. Once I got back to my apartment, I did the only thing I could think of. I barricaded myself inside. I shoved furniture against the doors, drew all the curtains, and sat in the corner of my room with a knife clutched in my hand. The irony wasn't lost on me. What good was a blade against a ghost or spirit or whatever the hell this was? But it was all I had, the last feeble attempt at taking back some control over my life. The hours passed in a blur, each second dragging on longer than the last. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the watcher's shadowy figure, waiting for me to falter. My phone buzzed with messages from friends and family, wondering where I was, why I wasn't answering their calls, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. How could I explain what was happening without sounding crazy? Then just after midnight, the power went out. My apartment was plunged into darkness, the shadows stretching long and twisted across the walls. The silence was suffocating, pressing in from all sides, and my heart raced in my chest like a trapped animal. I grabbed my phone, using it as a makeshift flashlight, and crept through the rooms, praying the power would come back soon. But as I moved through the hallway, I heard it. A soft, deliberate scraping sound, the same scratching I'd heard before. It was coming from behind me, growing louder, more insistent. I spun around, my light casting eerie shapes along the walls, but there was nothing there. Just empty air and shadows, mocking my fear. But I knew better than to trust my senses. This thing, whatever it was, thrived in the dark, and it was playing with me. I backed away slowly, trying to keep the light steady, trying to ignore the way my hand trembled. And then the whispers began, low, unintelligible murmurs, growing louder with each step I took. They came from every direction, filling the air with a cacophony of sound that made it impossible to think. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. "What do you want from me?" The whispers stopped abruptly, plunging the room back into an oppressive silence. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I'd lost my mind completely, but then I saw it, etched into the wall in front of me. The words, "Join us." The letters were jagged, as though carved by claws, and I could almost feel the malice radiating from them. I stumbled backward, colliding with the wall behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was a taunt, an invitation. The watcher wanted me to give in, to surrender to the madness it was spreading through my mind. I had to fight back, to find a way to sever its hold on me before it was too late. I spent the next day researching everything I could about this entity, digging through the deepest, darkest corners of the internet for any hint of what the Watcher truly was. It felt like an exercise in futility, grasping at threads that unraveled the moment I touched them. One thing was clear though. I wasn't the first to be hunted by this creature, and I wouldn't be the last. Every account I read described the same pattern of terror, the same feeling of inescapable dread. But there was one story that stood out, a post buried deep within the forum's archives. It was from a user named Raven Echo, who claimed to have survived an encounter with the Watcher. According to their post, the only way to escape its grasp was to confront it directly, to face the fear and let it know that it held no power over you. They described a ritual of sorts, a way to sever the connection by acknowledging its presence and rejecting it. The idea seemed insane, suicidal even, but what choice did I have? The Watcher was closing in, and my options were running out. That night, I prepared myself as best I could, drawing a circle of salt in the center of my living room and lighting a candle for light. It was pathetic, really, how desperate I'd become, clinging to superstition in a last-ditch attempt to save my sanity. As I sat in the circle, I felt the familiar chill of the Watcher's presence, a suffocating pressure that pressed in from all sides. The shadows around me seemed to pulse with a life of their own, writhing in anticipation. The air was thick with an unnatural silence, broken only by the rhythmic thud of my own heartbeat. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice shaking but determined. I called out to the Watcher, acknowledging its presence, demanding that it leave me alone. As the words left my lips, the whispers returned, growing louder and more insistent, a cacophony of voices trying to drown me out. But I didn't stop. I shouted over them, repeating the words like a mantra, refusing to let the fear control me any longer. The air around me seemed to tremble, the shadows shifting and swirling like a storm. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispers ceased. The room fell silent, the shadows retreating to their corners. I opened my eyes, half expecting to see the Watcher standing before me, but there was nothing, just the flickering candlelight and the echo of my own ragged breathing. I knew then that I had done it. I had faced the fear and driven the Watcher away, at least for now. But the knowledge brought a little comfort. I had glimpsed a world beyond our own, a realm of darkness and malevolence that existed just beneath the surface. The Watcher was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. The relief of surviving that night was short-lived. Though I'd managed to fend off the Watcher for the time being, the experience had left me shaken. I knew I had to learn more about what I was dealing with if I wanted to escape its clutches permanently. So I dove deeper into the dark web, reaching out to anyone who might have answers. In my search, I stumbled upon a hidden chat room dedicated to the study of the supernatural. The members were a ragtag group of conspiracy theorists, occult enthusiasts, and self-proclaimed demonologists. Most of them seemed like the kind of people who wore tinfoil hats and believed in Bigfoot, but a few were surprisingly knowledgeable. I explained my situation, detailing everything I'd experienced. The reaction was mixed. Some dismissed it as a hoax, while others claimed they'd heard of the Watcher, but thought it was just a myth. But one user, Eldritch Scholar, took a keen interest in my story. They claimed to have encountered something similar years ago and offered to help me. Eldritch Scholar shared a wealth of information about the Watcher. According to them, it was an ancient entity, possibly as old as humanity itself. It thrived on fear, drawing strength from the terror it inspired in its victims. But it wasn't invincible. They believed that the Watcher could be banished by confronting it with courage and resolve. More importantly, Eldritch Scholar explained that the Watcher targeted those who were vulnerable, who had already been touched by darkness in their lives. It was drawn to people with trauma, people who had experienced loss or despair. That hit me hard. It made sense. My life hadn't exactly been a walk in the park. I had my share of skeletons in the closet. As I processed this information, a sense of determination began to replace my fear. I couldn't let this thing win, couldn't let it destroy me like it had done to so many others. Eldritch Scholar offered to guide me through another ritual, one more potent and risky than the last. It was a dangerous proposition, but I was out of options. The ritual required several obscure ingredients, some of which were easy to find, while others took a bit of searching. I had to track down herbs, candles, and a few items I'd rather not mention. It felt like preparing for a battle, arming myself with whatever I could to fend off the impending doom. The night of the ritual, I set everything up in my living room. The air was thick with anticipation, the shadows long and menacing as they flickered in the candlelight. I could feel the Watcher's presence, lurking just beyond the veil, waiting for me to make a mistake. Eldritch Scholar guided me through the steps via an encrypted voice call, their voice steady and reassuring. They instructed me to focus my mind, to channel every ounce of fear into a single defiant purpose. The ritual involved chanting in a language I didn't understand, but the words felt powerful, resonant. As the ritual progressed, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper and more pronounced. I could feel the Watcher closing in, his presence oppressive and suffocating. It was a battle of wills, a struggle for control over my own mind. And as I reached the climax of the ritual, something incredible happened. The shadows in the room began to recede, the oppressive weight lifting as if a veil had been torn away. I felt a surge of strength, a clarity that had eluded me since this nightmare began. The Watcher's presence faded, its hold on me broken. I could breathe again, the air no longer heavy with fear. I'd done it. I'd faced the darkness and emerged victorious, at least for now. But I knew the victory was only temporary. The Watcher would return, drawn by the lingering traces of fear it had left behind. Eldritch Scholar congratulated me, their voice filled with relief and pride. They warned me to remain vigilant, to keep my mind and spirit strong. The Watcher might be gone for now, but it was always lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness. Despite the danger, I felt a newfound sense of hope. I wasn't alone in this fight. There were others out there who had faced the same terror and survived. Together, we could find a way to end the Watcher's reign of fear once and for all. I decided to document everything I'd learned, to share my story with others who might be in the same situation. The deep web was a dangerous place, but it was also a refuge for those who needed answers, who sought to fight back against the darkness. As I sat down to write, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear that had haunted me for so long was finally beginning to dissipate. I was no longer a victim, no longer a pawn in the Watcher's game. I was a survivor, and I was ready to fight back. Armed with newfound resolve, I dedicated myself to the task of gathering more information. If I was going to end the Watcher's threat, I needed to understand it fully. Eldritch Scholar and I stayed in contact, exchanging ideas and researching various legends and texts about similar entities. The more I learned, the clearer it became that the Watcher was unlike anything I had ever encountered before. Over the weeks, I reached out to others in the forum community, seeking stories from anyone who had dealt with the Watcher. Most had fled or given up, but a few were still determined to fight. We formed a small secret group, exchanging stories, theories, and potential strategies to banish the Watcher permanently. Through these interactions, I learned of an old ritual, whispered about in the shadows of occult circles, known as the Rite of Severance. It was said to be powerful enough to destroy entities like the Watcher, but came with great risk. The ritual required facing the Watcher in its true form, in the place it was most powerful, the place between dreams and reality. The prospect terrified me, but I knew it was the only way. With the guidance of Eldritch Scholar and the encouragement of my newfound allies, I began the preparations. The ritual would take place in a secluded location, away from prying eyes and potential interference. I chose an abandoned cabin deep in the woods, a place untouched by the chaos of the modern world. The night of the ritual, I arrived at the cabin with a mix of dread and determination. The air was still and heavy, the forest around me eerily silent. Inside, I set up a circle of protection, surrounding myself with the items and symbols I had painstakingly gathered. As I began the incantations, I could feel the Watcher's presence growing stronger, the air around me vibrating with an unnatural energy. The shadows seemed to pulse and writhe, the candlelight casting unsettling patterns across the walls. I closed my eyes, focusing my mind on the task at hand. I had to remain calm, to keep my fear in check. The Watcher thrived on terror, and I couldn't afford to give it any more power than it already had. As I chanted the final words, I felt a shift in the air, a ripple that seemed to cut through the fabric of reality itself. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in a place that defied description. The world around me was a swirling void, an endless expanse of darkness and light. And there, at the center of it all, was the Watcher. Its form was ever-changing, a grotesque amalgamation of shadows and nightmares. Its eyes, if they could be called that, were empty voids, consuming all light and hope. It stared at me, a silent challenge that sent a shiver down my spine. This was it, the moment of truth. I gathered every ounce of courage I had, focusing on the thought that had kept me going through the darkest moments of my ordeal. I would not be a victim. With a steady voice, I recited the incantation, my words echoing across the void. The Watcher surged towards me, its form distorting and twisting with rage. I felt its power pressing down on me, a suffocating force that threatened to crush my resolve. But I stood firm, pushing back with every fiber of my being. I reached deep within myself, drawing on the strength of those who had helped me, those who had faced this terror and survived. I was not alone in this fight. As the final words of the ritual left my lips, the void around me began to tremble. The Watcher let out a soundless scream, its form unraveling as the power of the ritual took hold. I felt a surge of energy, a light that cut through the darkness and banished the shadows. And then just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I found myself back in the cabin, the air still and silent once more. The oppressive weight that had hung over me for so long was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The Watcher was gone, its hold over me broken. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but victorious. The danger had passed, but the experience had left its mark. I knew I would never be the same again, but I was alive, and I was free. In the days that followed, I reached out to my allies, sharing the news of my success. We celebrated our victory, grateful for the chance to reclaim our lives from the shadow of the Watcher. Eldritch Scholar and I remained in contact, continuing to study the supernatural and help others who found themselves facing similar threats. I documented my experiences, sharing them with the online community and warning others of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. The Watcher might have been defeated, but there were other entities out there, waiting for their moment to strike. As I look back on those harrowing months, I realized that the fear never truly goes away. It lingers in the corners of your mind, a reminder of the darkness that exists beyond our understanding. But I also learned that courage and determination could overcome even the most terrifying of foes. I faced the abyss and survived. And if I can do it, then so can anyone else who finds themselves ensnared by the shadows. I found a forum on the deep web that Epstein's island is cover-up for something much worse. I've always been the kind of person who thrives on internet rabbit holes. You know, 1 minute you're looking up recipes for dinner, and the next you're deep in a forum thread about conspiracy theories that would make your head spin. But this was something different. This was something I wasn't ready for, and I wish I had never stumbled upon it. It all started a few weeks ago when a buddy of mine at work told me about the deep web. I'd heard of it before, of course, but it seemed like one of those urban legends, something everyone talks about, but no one really sees. My friend said it was a wild place where you could find anything from illegal goods to the kind of secrets that make governments shake. Being the curious idiot that I am, I decided to dive in and see what the fuss was about. Getting on the deep web was easier than I thought. A quick download of Tor, a bit of reading on how to navigate without getting myself arrested or hacked, and I was in. At first, it was exactly what you'd expect. Shady marketplaces, sketchy chat rooms, and the kind of weird niche forums you imagine only exist in the darkest corners of the internet. I can't say for sure what led me to the forum that would change everything. It was late at night, and I was several tabs deep into conspiracy theories about political elites and secret societies. A link posted by a user with a cryptic name caught my eye. The truth behind Epstein's island and why it's a distraction. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked. The forum wasn't like anything I had seen before. It wasn't just a bunch of wild theories thrown together by some bored internet users. It was organized, detailed, and full of documents, photos, and testimonies that looked disturbingly real. The user who started the thread claimed to be a former insider, someone who had seen too much and lived to tell the tale. The deeper I went, the more my skin crawled. This wasn't just about Epstein and his disgusting exploits. It was about what lay beneath the surface, something ancient and far more sinister. According to the posts, Epstein's island was just a front, a place where the elite gathered not only for their depraved parties, but to partake in rituals that were far more disturbing than anything that had been leaked to the public. As I scrolled through the pages, I found mention of an ancient alien race. Supposedly, these creatures had been visiting Earth for millennia, striking deals with those in power to ensure their wealth and influence in exchange for something horrific: blood. But not just any blood, alien blood, harvested from these beings through rituals that were equal parts sacrificial and scientific. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was absurd, the stuff of science fiction. Yet, the more I read, the more it made a twisted kind of sense. The testimonies were chilling, from people who claimed to have attended these rituals to others who had been part of the cover-up, silencing those who knew too much. The photos were the worst part, grainy, taken with what must have been hidden cameras. They showed rooms lit by candlelight, filled with symbols that hurt my eyes to look at. Figures in cloaks gathered around tables where creatures that resembled classic gray aliens lay, their bodies cut open with surgical precision. It was nauseating, and I had to look away more than once to keep from losing my dinner. But what really kept me awake at night were the videos. Blurry and distorted, they depicted scenes that seemed pulled straight from a nightmare. Men and women in expensive suits, drinking from chalices, the contents a deep, shimmering blue. The captions claimed that this was the alien blood, a substance so potent that a single drop could extend life, cure illness, and grant unimaginable power. The thing that haunts me most is the video of a man, clearly high on something, ranting about how he had tried to leave the group, but was too addicted to the feeling the blood gave him. He spoke of visions, of seeing the world through the eyes of these creatures, of understanding the universe in ways no human ever should. His eyes were wild, and his skin had an unnatural glow. The last seconds of the video cut off with a scream and a loud crash, leaving me staring at a blank screen. I closed my laptop, my hands shaking. It was too much. I couldn't tell if it was an elaborate hoax, or if I had stumbled onto something genuinely horrifying. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had to know more, to understand what I had seen. I spent the next few nights delving deeper into the forum. I barely slept, fueled by caffeine and a morbid curiosity that gnawed at me. I found more threads, more discussions about these alien rituals and the people involved. Names I recognized from the news, celebrities, politicians, all accused of participating in these ghastly rites. The more I read, the more paranoid I became. Every noise in my apartment made me jump, and I started to feel like I was being watched. I knew I should stop, but I couldn't. It was like an addiction, a need to uncover the truth no matter how much it terrified me. Eventually, I came across a post that chilled me to the bone. It was from the original thread starter, a warning to those who had read his story. They're watching. If you've come this far, it's too late. They won't let you leave. The only way out is silence. I slammed my laptop shut, heart pounding. I had gone too far, seen too much. Shadows in my apartment seemed to grow darker. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a threat. I knew I was in deep, and I had no idea how to get out. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had unleashed something terrible, that somehow, just by reading, I had become part of this nightmare. Sleep eluded me, and when I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with those haunting images, alien bodies, dark rituals, and a world where humanity was nothing more than a pawn in a cosmic game of power and corruption. I woke up drenched in sweat, knowing that this was just the beginning. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and I was terrified of what I might find next. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I left my apartment, I felt eyes on me, looking just beyond my sight. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia from reading those forums, but it was no use. It was like the shadow of what I'd seen online clung to me, infecting every part of my life. About a week after discovering the forum, I decided to take a break from the internet altogether. My mind was a tangled mess of fear and disbelief, and I figured a little fresh air might help. It was a bright Saturday morning, and I set out for a walk around my neighborhood. The sun felt good on my face, and I tried to enjoy the normalcy of it all. The kids playing in their yards, the hum of cars passing by, the smell of someone grilling burgers nearby. As I walked, I noticed a black SUV parked at the end of my street. It seemed out of place in our quiet neighborhood, but I brushed it off as someone visiting a neighbor. As I passed by, I caught a glimpse of someone inside, a silhouette behind tinted windows. I felt a chill run down my spine, but forced myself to keep walking, reminding myself that it was just a car. Later that day, I decided to visit a friend. Maybe some company would help take my mind off things. I knocked on his door, trying to seem casual, but inside I was a bundle of nerves. He greeted me with a grin and a beer, and we settled into his living room, talking about everything except what had been haunting me. Eventually, the conversation drifted to current events, and he mentioned Epstein. My stomach knotted, but I couldn't help myself. I told him about what I had found on the deep web, half expecting him to laugh it off as some wild conspiracy theory. Instead, his face grew serious. "You shouldn't be messing with that stuff, man," he said, leaning in closer. "There are people out there who will do anything to keep those secrets hidden." I tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably just a hoax, but inside I felt a cold fear settling in. If someone as skeptical as my friend was warning me off, maybe there was more to this than I'd realized. As I left his house later that night, I noticed the same black SUV parked a few houses down. It was the same car, I was sure of it, and a new wave of paranoia washed over me. When I got home, I locked the door and double-checked all the windows, feeling like a fool, but unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The forums had warned me, and now it seemed like those warnings were becoming my reality. Sleep was elusive, haunted by the fear that someone or something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The alien rituals I'd read about seemed to seep into my dreams, filling them with grotesque images of sacrifices and dark ceremonies where human and alien lives intertwined in a horrific dance of power. The next morning, I woke up to find an envelope slipped under my door. My heart raced as I picked it up, half expecting it to explode in my face. It was a plain white envelope, no markings, no address. Inside was a single piece of paper, neatly folded. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Written in neat, precise handwriting were the words, "You're in too deep. Stop now, or there will be consequences." I dropped the paper as if it burned me, my heart pounding in my chest. Who had sent this? How did they know where I lived? Panic gripped me as I considered my options. I thought about going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd been snooping around in places I shouldn't have been, reading about alien blood rituals and powerful elites. They'd think I was insane. Desperation drove me to log back into the deep web forum, hoping to find some way out. The thread was still there, more active than ever, but now it felt like a trap. I posted a message, asking for advice, hoping someone would help me figure out what to do. The responses were swift and merciless. Some users mocked me for being scared, calling me weak for wanting to back out. Others, though, seemed genuinely concerned, urging me to destroy my computer, move to a new place, and disappear off the grid. Amidst the chaos, one message stood out. It was from a user who claimed to have been in my position before, someone who had also seen too much. They warned me that the people behind these rituals were powerful, with resources far beyond anything I could imagine. They said the only way to escape was to destroy everything I'd seen and disappear, to become a ghost in the world. I shut my laptop, heart racing, and began to pack a bag. My mind was in a frenzy, part of me screaming that this was all insane, that I was overreacting, but another part, a darker part, knew that I had to get out before it was too late. I took one last look around my apartment, my life reduced to a few hastily packed bags. As I stepped out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that those dark eyes from the SUV were tracking my every move. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving to stay ahead of whatever was hunting me. The truth I'd uncovered was far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined, and now I was caught in its web. I drove through the night, avoiding main roads, every car behind me a potential threat. My mind raced, trying to figure out my next move. I knew I couldn't run forever, but for now, it was the only option. The alien blood, the rituals, the elites. I was in over my head, and there was no going back. The drive seemed to stretch on forever, the road unwinding like a dark ribbon under my headlights. The shadows outside my car seemed to twist and move, keeping pace with me as I drove through the night. Every time I saw a vehicle in my rearview mirror, my heart would skip a beat, convinced it was the black SUV. I didn't have a plan, just an overwhelming urge to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of whatever was coming for me. As dawn broke, I found myself in a small, nondescript town off the highway. I pulled into a run-down motel, the kind of place that didn't ask questions as long as you paid in cash. My body ached from the tension of driving through the night, but I forced myself to stay alert, knowing that I couldn't afford to let my guard down. I double-checked the lock on the door, wedging a chair under the knob for good measure before collapsing onto the bed. My sleep was fitful, plagued by nightmares that seemed more real than ever. I was back on the island, surrounded by shadowy figures, chanting in a language that hurt to hear. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and I could feel them pulling me into their dark ritual, my blood mixing with the alien substance that shimmered like liquid night. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as if I had just run a marathon. The note under my door made it clear that whoever was watching me was serious, and that realization fueled a primal fear I couldn't shake. I knew I needed help, but had no idea who to trust. My friend who had warned me seemed like a good start, but contacting him felt like putting both our lives at risk. I spent the next few days holed up in that dingy motel room, surviving on vending machine snacks and terrible coffee. Every time someone walked past my door, I froze, half expecting it to burst open with men in black suits coming to drag me away. The paranoia was suffocating, but the alternative, going back and facing whatever I'd uncovered, was far worse. In my more rational moments, I tried to piece together what I'd learned. The idea of aliens and rituals still felt ludicrous, like something out of a bad movie, but the evidence had been undeniable. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something truly monstrous, a secret so big it could unravel everything we thought we knew about the world. Desperation led me to reach out online, creating new accounts and using secure connections to keep my location hidden. I searched for others who might have had similar experiences, hoping to find someone who could guide me out of this nightmare. Eventually, I came across a forum for whistleblowers and conspiracy theorists, people who had also discovered dark truths and lived to tell the tale. It was there that I found a post from someone claiming to have escaped the clutches of the same organization that was now hunting me. The post detailed a meeting place, a location in a nearby city where survivors could gather and share information safely. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. I decided to take the risk and drove to the city under the cover of darkness, every nerve on edge as I tried to blend in with the late night traffic. The meeting place turned out to be a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. I parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, every step echoing in the empty streets. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows like empty eyes watching my every move. Inside, I found a small group of people gathered in a circle, their faces a mix of fear and determination. They looked up as I entered, and a woman stepped forward, introducing herself as Emily. Her eyes were sharp, filled with a mix of compassion and wariness, as if she understood exactly what I was going through. Emily listened patiently as I recounted my story, her expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished, she nodded, her voice steady as she spoke. "You're not alone," she said, gesturing to the others. "We've all been where you are now, caught in their web, but there's a way out." The others shared their stories, tales of encounters with the organization and the horrific truths they had uncovered. Some spoke of lost family members, others of near misses with death, but the common thread was the same: a relentless pursuit of power through dark, unholy means. Emily explained that the organization's rituals were part of a pact with the alien beings, a contract that promised them power and longevity in exchange for human sacrifice, and the alien blood that sustained them. The rituals were more than just ceremonies. They were a gateway, a means of summoning and controlling forces beyond our comprehension. The group had been working to expose the organization, gathering evidence and trying to disrupt their operations. They showed me documents, photos, and testimonies from others who had escaped, proof that what I had seen was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. But it was dangerous work, and they needed all the help they could get. They asked if I was willing to join them, to fight back against the darkness that threatened to consume us all. I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me like a physical force. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep running forever. I needed to face the nightmare head on, to do something instead of cowering in fear. I agreed to help, feeling a sense of purpose for the first time since this whole ordeal had begun. The group welcomed me, and together we started planning our next move, a daring attempt to infiltrate one of the organization's upcoming gatherings. As I left the warehouse that night, I felt a flicker of hope amid the fear. I wasn't alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, we could bring the truth to light. But I also knew that the road ahead was fraught with danger, and the stakes were higher than ever. The organization was ruthless, and they wouldn't stop until we were silenced for good. The real fight was just beginning, and I could only hope that we had the strength to see it through to the end. In the days following our meeting at the warehouse, I found myself thrust into a world that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Our little group was preparing to confront the organization, but we knew it wouldn't be easy. These people had resources, connections, and a chilling willingness to eliminate anyone who threatened their secrets. Emily and the others had been tracking a gathering of the elites, a secretive event rumored to take place on a remote estate outside the city. We spent hours poring over maps and documents, trying to piece together the best way to get in without being noticed. It felt surreal, planning an infiltration against a powerful cabal that seemed more fiction than reality. Despite the fear gnawing at my gut, there was a part of me that felt alive. I was finally doing something, fighting back against the darkness that had turned my life upside down. Each member of the group had their role to play. Some would handle the technology. Others were tasked with creating distractions, and a few of us were going in on the ground. As the day of the operation approached, the tension in our group was palpable. We gathered in Emily's apartment the night before, going over the plan one last time. Emily handed out burner phones and small earpieces, our lifelines, in case things went sideways. The room was filled with nervous energy, a shared understanding that this was our best chance to strike a blow against the organization. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with thoughts of what we were about to do. I kept picturing the ritual I'd seen in those grainy videos, imagining myself standing in the middle of it all. It was a chilling thought, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. The next evening, we set out for the estate. The drive was long and silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold. It was the calm before the storm, and my heart pounded in my chest as we approached our destination. We parked a few miles away, continuing on foot through the dense forest that surrounded the estate. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot, and I found myself jumping at shadows, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. When we reached the perimeter, we could see the estate in the distance, its grand silhouette outlined against the night sky. Security was tight, with guards patrolling the grounds and cameras sweeping the area. But we had a plan, and as we put it into action, I felt a grim determination settle over me. Emily and the tech team worked their magic, disabling the cameras and creating gaps in the patrol routes. It was my turn now, and I crept forward, heart in my throat, moving from shadow to shadow as I made my way toward the main building. The estate was enormous, with tall, imposing walls and intricate stonework that spoke of wealth and power. I slipped inside through a side entrance, the interior a maze of opulent rooms and corridors. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfumes and something else, something metallic and cold. As I moved through the halls, I heard faint voices, laughter and conversation, mingling with the clinking of glasses. The elites were gathering, oblivious to the fact that their secrets were about to be exposed. I found the room we were looking for, the heart of the estate where the rituals took place. It was hidden behind a false wall in the library, a door concealed among the shelves of ancient books. My hands shook as I activated the mechanism Emily had given me, the wall sliding open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. I descended slowly, the air growing colder with each step. The passage opened up into a large chamber, dimly lit by candles and filled with an eerie glow. The walls were covered in strange symbols, their jagged lines seeming to pulse with a life of their own. In the center of the room stood an altar, surrounded by figures in dark robes. I stayed in the shadows, my heart hammering as I watched the scene unfold. The figures chanted in that same unsettling language I'd heard in my nightmares, their voices rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. On the altar lay an alien creature, its skin glistening with a strange iridescence, its body lifeless and still. The leader of the group stepped forward, holding a ceremonial knife that glinted in the candlelight. He began to speak, his words a mixture of praise and invocation, calling upon the powers that their pact had granted them. As he raised the knife, the others joined in, their voices blending into a chilling harmony that reverberated through the chamber. The leader plunged the knife into the creature, and the room was filled with a blinding light as its blood began to flow, pooling into a basin carved with intricate patterns. The elites moved forward, each taking a turn to dip their chalices into the basin, drinking deeply of the alien essence. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This was what they had been hiding, the truth that they would kill to protect. I snapped as many photos as I could, capturing the ritual and the faces of those involved. This was our proof, the evidence we needed to bring them down. As I turned to leave, a hand clamped down on my shoulder, pulling me back into the shadows. I froze, my mind racing as I realized I'd been caught. My captor's grip was ironclad, and I found myself staring into the eyes of one of the guards. "Looks like you've seen too much," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're coming with me." I struggled, but he was too strong, dragging me back through the passage and up the stairs. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but it was too late. I'd been caught, and the nightmare I had been running from had finally caught up with me. As the guard pulled me into the main hall, I saw the elites emerging from the chamber, their faces flushed with the power of the ritual. They turned toward me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Who is this?" the leader asked, his voice dripping with authority. "A spy," the guard replied, shoving me forward. Caught him sneaking around the chamber. The leader studied me, his eyes cold and calculating. "You've seen things you shouldn't have," he said, his tone dangerously calm. "But it's too late for you now." I tried to plead, to explain that I wasn't a threat, but my words were drowned out by their laughter. They knew they had the upper hand, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. As they led me away, I felt a sense of despair settle over me. I had risked everything to uncover the truth, and now I was trapped, a pawn in their twisted game of power. But even as fear gripped me, I held on to a shred of hope. The photos I'd taken were out there, waiting to be shared with the world, and maybe, just maybe, they would be enough to bring the truth to light. I had been dragged to a small windowless room. The walls were made of thick stone, and there was a single door that creaked ominously as it shut behind me. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and I felt the weight of my predicament settling in. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to think of a way out, but I knew the odds were stacked against me. I could hear voices on the other side of the door, murmured conversations punctuated by bursts of laughter. They were discussing my fate, deciding what to do with the intruder who had dared to uncover their secrets. My mind raced as I realized that my chances of escape were slim. I had walked straight into their trap, and now I was at their mercy. But then I remembered the earpiece Emily had given me. I had forgotten about it in the chaos, but now it seemed like my only lifeline. I carefully reached up, activating it with a press of my thumb, and whispered, hoping against hope that someone on the other end was still listening. "Emily," I breathed, trying to keep my voice steady. "They've got me. I don't know how much time I have." There was a crackle of static, and then Emily's voice came through, strained but determined. "We're working on it. Hang tight. We'll get you out of there." Her words were a small comfort, but I knew the reality of the situation. I was in deep, and any rescue attempt would be fraught with danger. Still, the knowledge that I wasn't alone gave me a glimmer of hope. As I sat in that room, I thought about everything that had led me here. The deep web forum, the chilling discoveries, the alien rituals, and the elites who had stopped at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. It was a tangled web of power and corruption that extended far beyond anything I could have imagined. Hours passed, each one stretching endlessly as I waited, my nerves frayed and raw. Just when I thought I couldn't take it any longer, the door swung open and 2 guards entered, their expressions grim and unreadable. "Time to go," one of them said, gesturing for me to stand. I hesitated, my mind scrambling for a plan, but there was no choice. They led me through the dim corridors of the estate, the air heavy with the weight of impending doom. I was taken to a grand hall, its opulence a stark contrast to the darkness I had uncovered. The elites were gathered there, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to outright contempt. The leader stood at the forefront, his eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. "You've caused quite a stir," he said, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "We can't have you spreading our secrets to the world." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I knew what was coming, but the thought of it still sent a shiver down my spine. I opened my mouth to speak, to plead for my life, but before I could utter a word, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by chaos as the elite scrambled to react. In the confusion, I felt a hand grip my arm, pulling me back toward the shadows. It was Emily, her face set with determination as she guided me through the chaos. "This way," she whispered urgently, and we moved quickly, weaving through the panicked crowd. My heart raced as we navigated the labyrinthine halls, the sounds of shouting and confusion growing dimmer behind us. Emily led me to a side exit, where the rest of our group was waiting, with the vehicle idling quietly. We piled in, the engine revving as we sped away from the estate, leaving the madness behind. As we drove, the adrenaline slowly ebbed, replaced by a profound sense of relief. We had done it. We had escaped the clutches of the organization, and we had the evidence to prove everything. Over the next few days, our group worked tirelessly to compile the photos, videos, and testimonies we had gathered. We uploaded them to secure servers, reaching out to trusted journalists and whistleblower networks who could help us spread the word. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The revelation sent shockwaves through the media, shaking the foundations of power as people began to question the institutions they had once trusted. The organization's influence began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny, its members exposed and stripped of their power. But even as the truth came to light, I knew that the fight wasn't over. The organization was vast, with roots that stretched deep into the fabric of society. There would be more battles ahead, more secrets to uncover, but I was ready. The experiences I had endured had changed me, opening my eyes to a world I had never known existed. The danger was real, but so was the determination to see justice done. I had found allies in this struggle, and together we would continue to fight against the darkness that sought to control our world. As I stood with Emily and the others, watching the sun rise over the city, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We had taken the first step in a long and difficult journey, but it was a step that would lead us toward the truth. And in the end, the truth was worth fighting for. I ordered Rothschild's secret diary of the deep web. Okay, I need to get this off my chest. This happened about a month ago, and I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. It started on a typical Friday night when I was just aimlessly browsing Reddit, as one does. You know how you start on some thread about cats, and 2 hours later you're reading conspiracy theories about ancient aliens. Well, that's where I found the post about Rothschild's secret diary. Someone claimed it was this legendary collection of the deepest, darkest secrets from the dark web, gathered by some mysterious figure known only as Rothschild. Most people dismissed it as a hoax, a creepypasta in itself, but something about it piqued my interest. I've always had this fascination with the dark web, not because I'm into shady dealings or anything, but more out of sheer curiosity. The idea that there's this whole hidden part of the internet where anything goes, away from the prying eyes of the law and society, it just gives me the chills. I was scrolling through the comments, most of which were jokes or people calling it out as fake, until I found one user, DeepDiver92, who claimed to have a link to a seller. Now, before you call me an idiot, I was fully aware that this could be a scam, or worse, a trap. But, like I said, curiosity has always been my downfall. I messaged DeepDiver92, and within a few hours he responded with a link to a marketplace that wasn't on the typical dark web. It was a place I'd never heard of, something like Obsidian Bazaar, which already sounded ominous as hell. Navigating the dark web is like trying to find your way through a maze blindfolded. Everything feels off, and you can't help but feel like you're being watched. But I was determined. The marketplace was cluttered with listings for the usual illegal stuff: drugs, weapons, counterfeit money. But tucked away in a corner was the listing for Rothschild's diary. The description was vague but chilling. The truth that you fear, the secrets of humanity, all bound in the pages of a journal. Are you ready to see the darkness? It was ridiculously overpriced, costing more than what I make in 2 months. But at that moment, I didn't care. I had to know what was in it. So I did something incredibly stupid. I bought it. The seller promised delivery within a week. As soon as I completed the transaction, I had this gut-wrenching feeling of regret. I sat in my room, staring at my laptop, feeling like I had just sold my soul. But what was done was done. I just had to wait. Days went by with no sign of the package, and I started to think that maybe I had been scammed. But on the 6th day, a plain brown package arrived at my doorstep. No return address, just my name scrawled in messy handwriting. I brought it inside, heart pounding, and ripped it open. Inside was an old leather-bound book, its cover worn and stained. There was no title, nothing to indicate what it was, but I knew this was it. I opened it, expecting to see typed pages or something resembling a published book. Instead, it was all handwritten, the ink faded and smudged in places. The first few pages were mundane, notes about daily life. But as I flipped further, the entries became darker, more erratic. The writer described horrific scenes, like they had witnessed, or perhaps even participated in them. There were mentions of rituals, of shadows that spoke, of voices that commanded unspeakable acts. One entry detailed a sacrifice, a person tied down, pleading for their life as a hooded figure stood over them with a dagger. The diary described the victims' screams, how they echoed in the night, how the blood flowed and pooled on the ground. I could almost hear it, the way it was written so vividly. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. I kept reading, my morbid curiosity overpowering my fear, until I came across a page that made my blood run cold. It was an entry about someone who had read the diary, much like I was doing, and how they began to see things, shadows moving in the corner of their eye, whispers in the dark. things that weren't there. It ended with a warning. To know these secrets is to invite them into your life. You cannot unsee. You cannot unknow. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding. It felt like the room was closing in on me, the shadows growing darker, thicker. I told myself it was just a story, just some twisted fantasy someone had written down. But deep down, I felt something shift, like I had crossed a line I shouldn't have. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed like it was watching me. I felt this intense paranoia, like I wasn't alone. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, just my imagination running wild from reading those horrific entries. But part of me knew it was more than that. This was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up with a start. I was drenched in sweat, and my heart was racing like I'd just sprinted a mile. The nightmares from the night before were fading, but they left behind a lingering sense of dread. I stumbled out of bed, bleary-eyed and jittery, trying to shake off the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I tried to go about my day as normally as possible. I made breakfast, turned on the TV, and attempted to distract myself with mundane tasks. But my mind kept wandering back to the diary. I left it on the kitchen table, not wanting to touch it, but I could feel its presence like a heavy weight in the room. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from a friend of mine, Jake, asking if I wanted to hang out later. Normally, I'd jump at the chance to get out of the house, especially with the way I was feeling, but I hesitated. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to stay home, to figure out what to do with the diary. But then I realized that some company might actually help distract me, so I agreed to meet him at a local bar. Getting out of the house did help, at least for a little while. Jake and I talked about the usual stuff: work, sports, life. I didn't mention the diary. I didn't want him to think I'd lost my mind. But as the evening wore on, I started feeling restless, like something was pulling me back home. I kept checking my phone, looking at the time, counting down the minutes until I could leave without being rude. Eventually, I made up an excuse about an early morning meeting and headed home. As soon as I stepped through the door, the unease returned, stronger than ever. The diary was still there, seemingly innocent, yet I felt its pull. I decided that I had to read more. Maybe if I understood what I was dealing with, I could find a way to shake this feeling of dread. I grabbed the diary and sat down on the couch, bracing myself for whatever horrors were hidden in the pages. I flipped to where I had left off, taking a deep breath before diving back in. The entries continued to detail more disturbing events: people disappearing, strange symbols drawn in blood, rituals held in dark, forgotten places. The writer spoke of a group, a cult maybe, that worshipped something ancient and terrible, something that demanded blood and fear. As I read, I started to hear faint whispers, like someone was standing right behind me, speaking just low enough that I couldn't make out the words. I whipped around, but of course, no one was there. My heart was pounding, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. I turned back to the diary, determined to see it through to the end. Then I reached a page that was stuck to another. I carefully separated them, revealing a crudely drawn map. It looked like it led to some remote location in the woods, not far from where I lived. My blood ran cold as I read the notes scribbled next to the map. It was a guide to a ritual site, a place where sacrifices were made to appease whatever dark entity the cult worshipped. The writer described in gruesome detail what happened there, how the victims were chosen, how their fear was savored like a delicacy. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a diary. It was a guidebook, a manual for something twisted and evil. I slammed the book shut, the whispers around me growing louder, more insistent. I knew I couldn't keep it any longer. I had to get rid of it, but I also needed to know if any of this was real. The logical part of my brain told me to forget it, to burn the diary and never think about it again. But the curious part of me, the part that had ordered the damn thing in the first place, couldn't let it go. I had to see for myself if the place in the map existed. So the next day, I made a plan. I'd go to the site, just to see if there was anything there. If it was just an empty clearing, I'd destroy the diary and move on with my life. But if I found something, then, well, I hadn't really thought that far ahead. I packed a flashlight, my phone, and a few other essentials, shoving them into a backpack. I debated whether or not to bring a weapon, settling on a sturdy knife more for my own peace of mind than anything else. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that this was all some elaborate hoax, but my gut told me otherwise. That evening, just before dusk, I headed out. The sky was a dull gray, clouds thick and heavy with the promise of rain. I followed the map, each step taking me further away from civilization and deeper into the unknown. The forest was eerily silent, the usual sounds of wildlife absent, as if everything was holding its breath. After what felt like hours of walking, I finally reached the spot marked on the map. The trees parted to reveal a small clearing, the ground bare and scarred with strange symbols. My heart sank as I realized the drawings matched the ones in the diary. The place felt wrong, the air thick with a tension that made my skin crawl. I stood there, frozen, torn between my instinct to run and the sick fascination that had brought me there in the first place. I fumbled for my phone, snapping a few pictures as evidence, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. As I moved around the clearing, something caught my eye, a faint glimmer on the ground. I crouched down, brushing aside the dirt and leaves to reveal a small rusted object. It was an old, tarnished locket. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my palm. It seemed out of place here, like it had been left behind by someone long ago. I opened it, expecting to see a photo or inscription, but it was empty. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly pocketed the locket, glancing around as if expecting to see someone watching me from the shadows. But I was alone. At least I hoped I was. As I turned to leave, the whispers started again, louder now, urgent. They filled my ears, growing to a cacophony that drowned out my thoughts. I stumbled back through the woods, the sound following me, chasing me, until I finally burst out onto the road. I stood there panting, trying to catch my breath and calm my racing heart. I was done. Whatever this was, I wanted no part of it. I knew then that the diary was more than just a book. It was a doorway to something dark, something that shouldn't exist. I hurried home, my mind racing with what I had seen. I had to destroy the diary, to break whatever connection it had to me. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Whatever I had unleashed, it wasn't going to let me go without a fight. After my frantic trip to the clearing, I got home and collapsed on the couch, my mind spinning. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the room, and I couldn't shake the feeling that those shadows were reaching for me. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside made me jump. The locket I had found felt like a lead weight in my pocket, a tangible reminder of the nightmare I was now entangled in. I pulled the diary out again, staring at it with a mixture of fear and loathing. I knew I had to get rid of it, but burning it or throwing it away felt wrong, like it might make things worse somehow. I thought about burying it, but the idea of putting it back in the ground where it could be unearthed by someone else didn't sit right with me. In the end, I decided to lock it away in a small metal safe I kept under my bed. It wasn't much, but it felt like the safest option. As soon as I locked it inside, I felt a slight sense of relief, like I had put a barrier between myself and whatever malevolent force was attached to it. For a few days, life returned to something resembling normal. I went to work, saw friends, and did my best to ignore the whispers that still lingered at the edges of my hearing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking, watching, waiting for me to let my guard down. It was on the third night after my trip to the woods that things took a turn for the worse. I was sitting on the couch, mindlessly flipping through channels, when my TV screen flickered and went black. I cursed under my breath, reaching for the remote to turn it back on, but it stayed stubbornly dark. Then the whispers started again, louder than ever, pouring out of the TV like a sinister chant. I jumped up, backing away from the screen, as a cold sweat broke out on my skin. The voices were a jumbled mix of words I couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. I fumbled for my phone, trying to call someone, anyone, but the screen was a blank, unresponsive. Panic set in, and I glanced around the room, expecting to see shadows coalescing into something tangible and terrifying. That's when I saw it, the outline of a figure standing just outside the window, silhouetted against the dim glow of the streetlights. My heart leapt into my throat, and I froze, unsure whether to run or confront whoever or whatever it was. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching. I forced myself to move, slowly backing toward the door. As I did, the whispers grew louder, crescendoing into a deafening roar. It was like they were inside my head, clawing at my sanity. I made it to the door, flinging it open and stumbling outside, gasping for breath like I had been drowning. The figure was gone, vanished as if it had never been there, but I could still feel its presence, a cold, creeping sensation that refused to leave. I knew then that I couldn't stay here. Whatever I had brought into my life with that diary wasn't going to let me go so easily. I grabbed my keys and jumped into my car, not caring where I was going, as long as it was away from there. I drove for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me, but the road behind me remained empty. Still, the feeling of being watched persisted, an invisible weight pressing down on me. Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot of a 24-hour diner, needing somewhere to collect my thoughts. The neon lights flickered overhead as I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart. I debated calling Jake or another friend, but I didn't want to drag anyone else into this nightmare. Instead, I went inside, grateful for the bright lights and the presence of other people, even if they were strangers. I ordered a coffee and sat in a booth, trying to figure out my next move. Part of me wanted to drive until I hit the coast, to leave everything behind and start fresh somewhere new, but I knew I couldn't run forever. Whatever this was, it would follow me. The waitress brought my coffee, and I sipped it slowly, letting the warmth calm my nerves. I needed to end this, to find a way to break whatever connection the diary had forged. As I sat there, I realized I needed help. Someone who understood the dark web, who might know what this thing really was. After finishing my coffee, I pulled out my phone and searched for anything that might give me a lead. I found forums and message boards where people discussed the dark web, but most of it was just speculation and ghost stories. Then I stumbled across a thread about cursed objects and rituals. It was filled with stories about people who had encountered similar things, people who had survived, and some who hadn't. One user, the Skeptic 42, seemed knowledgeable, their posts detailed and full of advice for dealing with supernatural phenomena. They recommended a few ways to sever ties with cursed objects, including finding the source of the curse and destroying it. It was a long shot, but it was something. I sent them a private message, briefly explaining my situation without giving too much away. To my surprise, they replied almost immediately, asking for more details and warning me to be cautious. They seemed genuinely concerned, which was comforting in a strange way. After exchanging a few messages, they offered to help me remotely, guiding me through the steps needed to end this once and for all. I felt a flicker of hope, like maybe there was a way out of this nightmare. Feeling a bit more grounded, I left the diner and drove back home, the first rays of dawn peeking over the horizon. I was exhausted, my body and mind on the brink of collapse. But I had a plan now. I was going to put an end to this, to break free from whatever darkness I had unleashed. As I stepped through my front door, the whispers greeted me again, soft and insidious. But this time, I was ready. I knew what I had to do, and I wasn't going to let them win. I was going to fight back, determined to end this once and for all. I sat down at my kitchen table, staring at the metal safe that held the diary. It was almost noon, and the daylight streaming through the windows gave me a false sense of security. I kept my phone nearby, waiting for the Skeptic 42's next message. I was anxious to get this over with, to sever whatever tie had been created between me and the diary. The plan was simple, or at least it seemed that way in the text. Find the source of the diary's power and destroy it. The skeptic believed that there was something inside the diary that tethered it to the dark forces it described, something physical and tangible. They instructed me to look for any signs of a hidden compartment, loose pages, or anything that seemed out of place. I opened the safe with shaky hands, pulling out the diary. The whispers surged in volume as I did, a chorus of dissonant voices echoing in my ears. It felt like they were pleading, urging me to stop, but I gritted my teeth and forced myself to ignore them. I flipped through the pages carefully, inspecting each one for anything that stood out. Most of the writing was the same, dark tales of horror and madness, but nothing seemed unusual. No loose pages, no hidden messages. I was about to give up when I noticed something strange on the inside of the back cover. The leather felt thicker there, slightly uneven. My fingers probed the edges until I found a small seam, almost imperceptible. I pried it open with my fingernail, revealing a hidden pocket. Inside was a small blackened shard of metal, no larger than a coin. It was ice cold to the touch, and as I held it, the whispers intensified, an angry, unintelligible cacophony. I snapped a photo of the shard and sent it to the Skeptic 42. They replied almost immediately, confirming my suspicions. It was likely the source of the diary's power. Their instructions were clear. I needed to destroy it, completely and utterly, to break its hold. Destruction wasn't going to be easy. The skeptic warned me that simply throwing it away or smashing it wouldn't be enough. I needed to use fire, intense, purifying flames that could consume and obliterate the metal completely. There was no time to waste. I grabbed a metal pot from the kitchen, setting it on the stovetop. I placed the shard inside, hesitating only for a moment before igniting the gas burner beneath it. As the flames began to lick at the shard, the whispers turned into screams, a chorus of agony that reverberated through the room. I cranked up the heat, watching as the shard glowed red, then white hot. The screams grew louder, filling the house with their dreadful noise, but I forced myself to hold steady. Sweat dripped down my face as I watched the metal begin to liquefy, its form losing shape as the heat consumed it. Just as the last of the shard melted into a molten pool, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was so sudden, so absolute, that it left my ears ringing. I shut off the stove and collapsed into a chair, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. It was over, or so I thought. As I sat there, catching my breath, the lights flickered. The air around me grew cold, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and writhe like living things. I watched in horror as they began to coalesce into a shape, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the light. It was the same silhouette I had seen outside my window, only now it was here, in my home. I could make out no features, just a dark outline that radiated malice. I felt frozen in place, unable to look away, unable to move. Then the figure spoke, its voice a low, guttural rumble that seemed to shake the very walls. "You cannot destroy what you do not understand. We are bound, you and I." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Destroying the shard had severed its connection to the diary, but not to me. Whatever darkness I had unleashed, it had latched onto me instead, using me as its new vessel. I stumbled back, panic clawing at my mind. The figure stepped forward, its presence filling the room with a palpable weight. My thoughts raced as I tried to remember the Skeptic 42's warnings, anything that might help me banish this thing. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, typing out a desperate message to the Skeptic 42, explaining what had happened. I hit send, praying for a quick response, for some kind of guidance. Seconds felt like hours as I waited, the figure watching me with an unnerving stillness. My phone vibrated and I snatched it up, reading the message with a growing sense of dread. It's not just about the diary. The ritual at the site. Did you disturb it? You need to complete it to break the bond. The darkness will fight back. You must be prepared. My stomach churned at the thought of returning to that place, but I had no choice. If completing the ritual was the only way to free myself from this nightmare, then I had to do it. I couldn't let this thing follow me, couldn't let it wreak havoc on my life or anyone else's. The figure in the room seemed to sense my resolve, its form flickering like a dying flame. I grabbed my backpack, stuffing it with supplies for the journey. A flashlight, a lighter salt, anything I could think of that might help. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. As I stepped out into the night, the air crackled with tension, and I knew I was not alone. The darkness had claimed me, but I was going to take back my life, no matter the cost. The drive back to the clearing felt surreal, each mile a journey deeper into the unknown. The roads were deserted, and the shadows outside seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The figure from my home haunted my thoughts, a reminder of the stakes. I clutched the steering wheel with a white-knuckled grip, determined to end this once and for all. As I reached the edge of the woods, I parked the car and gathered my backpack, feeling the weight of the task ahead. The skeptic's words echoed in my mind. The darkness will fight back. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. I turned on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the inky darkness as I followed the path from the map. Each step was a struggle against the fear that clawed at my mind, whispering that I was walking into a trap. But I had no choice. I had to see this through to the end. When I reached the clearing, I stopped, my breath hitching in my throat. The place was just as I remembered, bare, marked with strange symbols, the air heavy with a malevolent energy. But now, the shadows seemed to pulse and writhe, alive with an unseen force. I took out the salt and began to draw a circle around the center of the clearing, just as the skeptic had instructed. My hands shook, but I forced myself to focus, to move with purpose. As I worked, the whispers returned, a cacophony of voices rising from the shadows, trying to drown out my thoughts. I finished the circle and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I pulled out the lighter, lighting a small fire in the center. The flames flickered, casting an eerie glow that seemed to push back against the darkness. Then I reached into my backpack and retrieved the diary, placing it in the circle with me. I opened it to the page with the ritual instructions, my eyes scanning the text as I tried to make sense of the strange symbols and words. The air around me grew colder, the darkness pressing in closer, and I could feel the presence of the figure watching, waiting for me to fail. I forced myself to focus, to push past the fear and the doubt. I began to chant, my voice trembling at first, then growing stronger as I spoke the words from the diary. Each syllable felt like a battle, like I was wrestling with the very shadows around me. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, but I kept going, pouring every ounce of determination into the ritual. As I chanted, the shadows around the circle seemed to writhe in pain, recoiling from the light and the words. The figure emerged from the darkness, its form more defined now, a towering, faceless silhouette, its presence suffocating. "You cannot banish me," it hissed, its voice a chilling blend of anger and desperation. "You are mine." I refused to back down. I continued the chant, feeling the power in the words, the strength in the ritual. The flames burned brighter, and I could sense the balance shifting, the bond between me and the darkness weakening. The figure surged forward, reaching for me with tendrils of shadow, but the circle of salt held firm, repelling its advance. I could feel the energy building, a crescendo of light and sound, and I knew I was close. With one final shout, I completed the ritual, the words echoing through the clearing like a thunderclap. The figure let out a scream, a sound of pure rage and despair, and then it began to unravel, the shadows dissolving into nothingness. The clearing fell silent, the oppressive weight of the darkness lifting as the night air returned to normal. I collapsed to my knees, the exhaustion hitting me like a tidal wave. But I knew it was over. The bond had been broken. I stayed there for a while, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. I had confronted the darkness and won, but it had come at a cost. I knew I would never be the same, that the memories of this experience would haunt me for the rest of my life. Eventually, I made my way back to the car, the diary clutched in my hands. I knew I had to destroy it, to ensure that no one else would ever go through what I had endured. As I drove home, I tossed it into a nearby river, watching as it disappeared beneath the surface, carried away by the current. The days that followed were quiet, the whispers finally silenced, the shadows no longer stalking my every move. I tried to return to normal, to pick up the pieces of my life, but there was a part of me that would always remain on edge, always wary of what lurked beyond the veil. I still think about that night sometimes, about the figure in the darkness and the diary that started it all. I wonder if there are other books like it out there, waiting to be discovered by someone else with a curious mind and an adventurous spirit. I hope they never find them